Mike Bowers. I want to welcome you to the Small Business Breakthroughs presented by the Ohio Small Business Development Center at Columbus State Community College. Really excited for today's guest. We'll have Rick Slark with us in a moment. We're going to talk about, growing your business and scaling your business. And I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation today. Also, I want to introduce our partner in this venture from the Dublin Entrepreneurial Center, Susie Gillian. Susie, we're back with our green backgrounds and here at the Dublin Entrepreneurial Center, or the DEC. You want to tell us a little bit about the center here?
Yeah, it's an honor to be part of the DEC. And I represent Chaz Frutel today, who's the director of the Dublin Entrepreneur Center. The DEC consists of over 95 office spaces and unlimited hotspots. But their claim to fame is that it's more than office space. It's a collaborative environment where people can grow their businesses and collaborate with others. There's over 120 businesses represented here right now, and about 200 graduates, which is phenomenal over the last decade. We call them graduates if they outgrow the space, and more than 90% of them are still in business. So way above the national average for businesses and their longevity and their growth. So it is a joy to be here and represent them, and our partnership with Mike goes way back through a friendship and business partner with Chaz Frutel. And so I'll put our contact information in the chat today. So if you have any questions, you can reach out. Thanks, Mike.
Sure thing. As I say every time when we do this, I think the DEC and organizations like this that really provide not only office space and use of addresses and things of that nature, but it provides that community, and it provides the ability to connect with other entrepreneurs in kind of a peer-to-peer mentoring kind of thing. So if you're kind of new to being an entrepreneur, or you're launching out and doing some different things, there's always somebody to talk to. So I think that's the best thing about being involved in these types of things. So Susie, thank you, and obviously we thank the DEC for their participation with this particular program. So I want to move on to our featured guest, the inimitable, is that the word I want? Rick Slark.
I don't know what that word is.
I'm not 100% sure what that means, but I think we'll go with it anyway. So I've known Rick for a while. Rick's had different interactions with various SBDCs around the state, and he's worked with our SBDC. He does a fabulous job in working with small businesses, and I thought that this would be a great opportunity to have Rick come on. Rick, actually, I think you did 2 standalone workshops on kind of coming out of COVID for us back in 2020. And then I think you spoke at our virtual Capital Crash Course too, kind of prepping for 2021. So, again, we appreciate everything that you're doing. Rick, you want to kind of fill in the gaps, kind of let people know a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. Thank you for coming, everyone. We really appreciate it. And I'm really happy. I love the SBDC in Columbus. I love what they do. I've been to a lot of their functions and had some interactions. Great people working there, and we appreciate all you do. We've also had some relationship with the DEC, and just are excited about that number that you just gave, Susie, is amazing. So that's a great response. So I pastored 25 years and did a lot of consulting work with nonprofits during that time. And after I left that, I went to the dealing with small business and corporate world. I have my own consulting business and do a lot of work in the area. So just really excited to be here today, and I like the format, just kind of talking, and I hope that at the end of the day, some people have gotten some nuggets that they can then really take and use as soon as they go back to work and do some amazing things in their business.
Yeah, Rick, I want you to kind of share some of your thoughts, because I know that you worked obviously with in various co-working spaces and different entrepreneurial spaces in different places with entrepreneurs. And we were talking about the deck, we were talking about the community and things of that nature. But I mean, what are your experiences? What do you think that entrepreneurs can pull out of working in these kind of entrepreneurial, hotbed spots like this?
Well, first of all, they get, they have the total environment. I like to think in the terms of ecosystems.
Right.
And so there they are in a really good ecosystem that are like-minded entrepreneurs. A lot of them struggling with the same thing. Some may be a little further along and could give advice. And here's how that worked for me. Here's what you could expect in that situation. But just being in that environment, rather than being at home or somewhere else, there's a lot of advantage in just seeing what other people are doing and listening to what other people are doing, and then just the advice that comes around, I think, is really helpful. And we can all, in that, especially in that early stage, need a lift up, and any lift up is good. So I think that's one of the real advantages.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we're going to go through, we're going to have some conversation. Anybody that has any questions or comments, feel free to put those in the chat. I'll try to keep an eye on that. Bruce Walters will keep an eye on that from our SBDC team, and we'll kind of go from there. So let's get started. And I want to start out basically with what your thoughts are, kind of the difference between like a business owner, a small business owner, somebody that started a small business, and this entrepreneur or serial entrepreneur that's really looking to potentially scale. So what do you see as the differences initially in that, and then we'll go from there?
Well, a lot of the entrepreneurs are really interested in just getting something started. They are energized by the initial start. And can this idea that is in my brain that came around at 2 o'clock in the morning, can I actually make that happen, right? So that's their energy. That's where they get their passion from, is doing that. They're not so interested in letting the thing run long term. They would have other people do that, then they move on to something else. So most entrepreneurs get the thing started, see if the idea works. They don't really care if it doesn't. They're not like totally like a store owner or a shop owner, a business owner. They put everything into that basket. And they are there to start it and to work through the process of it and make it happen. And they're not interested in anything else at that point. They just want this thing to work. And if it doesn't, their identity is like so crushed and they feel so awful. Whereas the entrepreneur is kind of more like, oh, well, that didn't work. Let's start something else. And they might have 7 or 8 businesses or things happening at the same time, and they're just spinning these plates. They're real high energy, or tend to be real high energy people. And so those are a couple of the differences I see in them.
Yeah. So do you see, obviously there are entrepreneurs, there are individuals that start businesses, specifically to grow them and scale them. And then, like you said, there's this kind of the small business owner we might talk about that wants to create a lifestyle business, that they have a job and maybe they can put on a couple other people. And it's really around their passion in that particular case. So they don't really, they certainly don't want to sell it. They don't want partners, different things like that, which would be different than this. But do you see folks that, hey, I started a small business, I thought that it had some legs, I kind of saw maybe there was something in the market, but I went and started it with no expectation of scaling, to, oh, well, wait a minute, maybe there is something here and I want to do something different, especially kind of, maybe it's more of that first time entrepreneur who really gets their feet wet and says, oh, wait a minute, I am probably more entrepreneurial than I thought I was.
Yeah, most of the time I see that a person that's entrepreneurial has been an entrepreneur their whole life. They started lemonade stands, they went out and sold fly. There's kind of a history of them being young and having all of this entrepreneur stuff. I remember a guy back in my neighborhood years and years ago. that he decided, he was very entrepreneurial at that early age, and he decided he was going to build a putt-putt course in his backyard. And he had pots and pans in a hole, and he had like an old broken down end table for a ramp, and the ball would go into one of these pots and pans, and he made like 7 or 8 holes. Then he made up these flyers and went around the neighborhood, and it was like, for 10 cents you can come play this putt-putt thing. So that was something that's an entrepreneur for you, you know. And so early on they kind of know it. Now on the other hand, if you have a store owner or a shop owner, business owner that is kind of different from that, I think what they can do is, as they're growing, see that, yeah, this has some potential. And to me, the determining factor is, does that store owner have the wherewithal to personally develop themselves and professionally develop themselves to create what it's going to take? Because to scale a business is not just technique and not just business techniques and tactics, but more of it is the owner inside and his mindset or her mindset. And am I going to do the work it's going to take, learn the new skills I'm going to have to learn to carry this out? Because it's huge.
Yeah. So maybe I want to define a term real quick before we go, because we're going to be using this term quite a bit. So how would you define or explain to somebody when we say we want to scale a business? How do you define that for folks?
So, yeah, for a simple definition is, I want this to be as big as the market will allow it to be. That's the definition I like to use, is to scale the business. So I just taught a freelance class, and one of the things that I see in freelancers is that they are all about, I'm going to follow my passion. Well, I don't believe in that, because sometimes your passion has no market, right? So you're following your passion, but nobody's going to buy what you're doing, because this passion, the market dictates what will sell, not you, not your passion, right? Now that's kind of, I get a lot of pushback on that, right? So I see people spending their whole time on this passion that has no market. And so what I try to teach them or say to them is, look, you need to find whatever the market will buy. If no one's doing what you're talking about in the whole country, you're not going to do it either, probably, right? Because the market has said, no, this isn't, people aren't going to pay for that. So, but there is a place where you can get yourself to a position where the market, you could be as big as the market would want you to be or allow you to be. And that's when you're scaling.
And do you see that? Obviously, I used to work in Venture Capital Association here in town, and that's a common term in this kind of high-tech venture capital kind of thing. Let's dump a bunch of money in it, make it grow super big. But do you see that the scale opportunities for what I would classify more traditional businesses that do have markets to grow, but more of these more traditional businesses?
Yeah, I think you can. I mean, coffee shops are doing it, you know.
Right.
There are lawn care companies that are doing, look at what used to be True Green or ChemLawn or whatever they are. They certainly took that and scaled something. And how many people are in your organization that are landscapers right now? You know, there are tons. So yeah, there are. But the other hindrance to that in scaling is how much education, and I don't mean this in schooling, I mean personal, professional development mindset. How much do you want to give as an owner to it? Because as you grow your business, you have to add new professional skills. You have to add new mindsets. For instance, so you've been a solo owner and you've just done your thing, and now you're bringing on employees as the business grows. Well, now you have to learn how to delegate and how to train. And here's what most people do in that first stage. They just say, okay, here's what I need you to do. And then they leave them alone and don't give them any guidance, don't give them any training, don't give them any guardrails. And then they're mad when the people don't know what to do, right? So developing delegation skills, how to handle employees, how to communicate better. All of those are skills that a solo owner has to develop if they want to move on to scale.
Okay, so when we've talked about this before, you use this term, visionary founder. So you want to talk a little bit about that, but then also then kind of tie that into what you just said.
Yeah, for sure. So mostly when not all the time, but mostly when a business is started, the person has some visionary tendencies, which would be entrepreneurial in some ways. And they have this vision and they want to do this and they want to do that. And they're out there doing it. I used to work with a guy that was a visionary owner, and every time he went to a convention, he came back and then we were doing something different, right? So we hated when he came back from these conferences, because what we were going to do, like for the whole month, he's been evangelizing us on this. The next thing we're going to do is something totally different. And like, we all knew that that'd last for a couple of weeks, right? And then he'd do something else. Well, that's the visionary, right? And so they're just constantly jumping from one thing to another. And we all saw that commercial, and it's kind of become part of our culture now, where the person's talking and they go squirrel and they move off to something else, right? We've all seen that. And that's kind of the visionary. And if the visionary, what is really helpful as you're starting up is if you have an operator. And the operator is the one that takes the visionary's idea and puts it to concrete action. And so that could be a husband and wife team, that could be a partnership, that could be friends, but there's somebody there that's an operator that does the actual work and make sure that they're, you know, the bills are paid, and make sure, because the visionaries, they don't care about any of that. The way you could tell a visionary is once you're talking to them and you start to get into details and they check out, they're like gone. I've seen literally been in meetings where the visionary, once he did his thing or she did her thing, and then we began to get in the numbers and all that, they just walked out because like they didn't care about that. Right. And I mean, that's the visionary for you. And so you need that, because that's the gasoline, but you also then need the drivetrain and all of that. And that's the operator. So you need both of those. And you typically find that in startup and then moving into what we call fun, where the business is growing, you need both of those. Then as you start to scale, you need to add a third person into that mix. And that is what we call the processor. And the processor is the one that starts to make us be a big boy business. We're not just having meetings on the golf course or in the elevator, but we're actually going to have some structure, and we're going to become a big boy business, or, you know, something like we're growing up a little bit. And the processor is the one that does that. The problem is that the visionary and the operator have some relationship. And when the processor comes in and starts saying, well, you can't just do that anymore, you need to do it this way, everybody's really mad at the processor, and they typically don't last long. And you go through 3 or 4 of those pretty quickly because it's their fault, right?
Right.
And I'll tell a funny story about that real quick. I was pastoring this church and it was just booming, right? Well, we hired a CPA and they were doing the work, and she kept and you know how the CPAs are, and they kept getting on me about getting receipts. I'd go out and I'd buy gas, or I'd buy this, or I'd buy that. They go, we need your receipts. And I finally got sick of them saying that. And I am not proud of this, but it is funny now. It wasn't funny at the time. And I said, look, I'm a pastor. I'll do what I want to do. I don't need to give you anything, right? Because I didn't understand the whole process, but that's kind of how it works when you're trying to put a processor in. They get the bad run of all that stuff.
Yeah. So a little bit later on, I want to ask you about some maybe book recommendations and things, but I'm assuming that you've read the E-Myth and all of that. You know, a big part of that is creating these processes or creating these structures as a small business owner. At what point do you see it important to start implementing these kind of processes? And I guess I'm going to ask you for a more traditional, just kind of lifestyle business, but also then, okay, if we do want to scale, when do we need to start really thinking about starting to implement these kind of pieces?
Yeah, it's a tough question because there's no time limit, right? So every one of these businesses, depending on the skill of the visionary, the market, the timing, the cash that they have to start with, all of those things play in how fast you move from one of these phases to another, right? So it's really hard to give any metric that says at this year, 4 years, you're ready to do this or do that. So it's kind of just understanding what's happening. And so it's really hard to dictate that. But one of the mistakes I made when I first started the consulting business was I figured out how I was going to handle consulting over the phone. And now I didn't have a client at this point, but I spent like weeks, the script and the steps and processes and all of that. I did that for like all of this stuff. Well, what I found out was once I started getting clients, none of it worked. It was like, I spent all of this time building these processes and stuff, and it was a complete waste of time. And I told somebody the other day, I got the letterhead and I was so excited about that. And I think I bought 5,000 things of pieces of letterhead. And I think I have 4,999 of them left, right? I just haven't used any of it. And that conversation came out of a guy that I was working with yesterday or a couple of days ago, who is beginning to start a small welding shop. And now here's the situation. He won't care I'm talking about this. He's got this welding shop. They have no water. They have 220 electric in one spot, and they've got like a couple lights hanging down to see, right? And he's worried about business cards. And I'm like, he brought it up like 4 times in the meeting. And I'm like, dude, why are you worried about business cards? That's the last thing you need to be worrying about. You need to be worrying about getting the shop right, get some water on, and be able to do the job, right? And so all those things are at the beginning. You don't need them, right? I think we spend way too much time on that kind of process and stuff at the beginning. And as you move forward, I think it happens organically. I'm dealing with a guy right now. He just added they're starting to move the fund where they're making some money. He's added his first salesperson. And now he's calling me every day saying, what's my sales guy supposed to be doing? Like, how do I know if he's doing the right thing? Where are we going to get leads from? What is it that, what kind of CRM system do I use? How do I track all this stuff, right? So those are the systems you begin to put in place as you go on. And one of the conversations we had yesterday about that whole thing was he got himself into trouble because there's a conflict now where the salesperson is doing something and the owner's aggravated about it, but he never laid this out ahead of time of the expectations. And so we started talking about a handbook and a handbook is a glorious, like way over the top of what this guy needs, but it's a good definition. He needs something with expectations that this person signs. And so those processes start to happen organically, I think.
Yeah. And I think that's important because especially on the sales side, because you've got somebody that's coming in that more than likely is probably going to be pretty extroverted, going to be out doing different things and stuff like that. And you need to, I like your term, you need to put some guardrails in here to make sure that this individual is doing what you're expecting them to do. Doesn't mean you can't take advice from them or take some feedback from them. They probably got some ideas, but it's important to do that. And when you do that, then especially on the sales side, because if you've got somebody, I have a friend, Janice Mitchell, is an entrepreneur here in Central Ohio. And she always talked about, from a sales perspective, when you're hiring salespeople, is that, you hire them, you give them some expectations, but you also are be willing to fire them quickly if they're not doing it. Don't drag it out and don't drag it out, because that could really cause you a problem. And to be able to do that, you've got to have, something in place for that individual. So I think that's really critical. I think it's really important to do. And I also like the piece that I think what you're saying here is that the implementation of these systems is really driven by the demands of the business.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. But don't be like me, and do all of these things you think are going to happen and put all these systems in place, and then you just wasted 2 weeks or whatever, right? And so let it happen organically. So he realized, the owner realized now that he had made a mistake in not setting expectation early on. And then the other part was like we started talking about vacation day, the guys wanting vacation time and stuff like that. Well, it's never been addressed, and he's been working, right? And so I said, this is why you have to have some kind of minimal handbook, at least, that they sign and they know, and that goes in their file. Because if you fire somebody, or because this is an employee, it's not a 1099. They could turn around and sue you and or make accusation, and you want to cover yourself for sure. And by having them sign something, have it in the folder, you read this, you know what the expectations are, then you have a footing, if that worst case scenario happens, which it will happen.
Right. Do you, based on your experience, these individuals that are kind of focusing on the system and laying here and typing out this and focusing on the business card and all that kind of stuff, especially at the early stages, do you see this as more of a procrastination type of thing for them?
I think for some of them, yes. And let me say this, especially with salespeople, I'll see a lot of salespeople that do a lot, like, we talk about investigating a client before you talk about them. And I just had this conversation the other day. Their salesperson is spending like an hour investigating the prospect. And I'm like, why? You should be spending 10 minutes to see who you need to talk to and basically what the business is. And if you've defined your customer, you know what they are or what they do. And that should take 10 minutes, and then make the call. And what I discovered there is, I think that was a fear thing. Like, I just don't want to make the call, so I'm doing this other work, but I feel busy. So I'm appeasing myself in my mind with that. So yeah, I do think that is in that case. But on the other hand, I think it's just what they've been told. That's what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to get business cards. I'm supposed to get, letterhead. I'm supposed to get whatever, and they just kind of think that's what's supposed to happen.
Right. So let's take and kind of shift a little bit to this next stage. So let's say you're this visionary founder, you're an entrepreneur, you're doing different things, you've got the business, and starting to pick up. You actually had some level of a market to start with. Maybe you're doing $500,000 a year or something like that. You kind of you're doing okay, but you want to take it to the next level. So talk to me about what is that next step? What's super important? And what I'm specifically asking about is identifying your market, and this mining the market term, I think that
Sure.
Talk about that and kind of what we need to be doing there.
Okay, so in the startup phase or early struggle phase, what you want to do, the main thing you want to be doing is to find a profitable and sustainable market. That's what, when you get up in the morning or you do your work after work from your day job, you want to find your sustainable and profitable market. That's what you should be doing as a startup. And then once you find your profitable and system, and that will take some time, it'll take some trial and error. You're going to make mistakes on that, but you need to know your customer. You need to know who the target is. Very, very critical. So then once you have that and you go like, oh my gosh, we can pay the bills this month. What do you mean we can pay the bills? I don't have to use my credit card? No, we can pay it out of the business. What are you talking about? Yeah, it's amazing. I can't believe it either. That then you begin to do that repetitively, and that becomes consistent. You move into what we call fun. And that's a great time, right? So fun is when it's the best time for most founders and most owners that go long term. They look back at the fun stage as that was the best time, because everybody's in unity. We're all for the same thing. We're all pitching in. We're all working together. We get this order that we're really struggling to get out. We stay late till Friday night, and everybody's pitching in till midnight. And then we get beer and pizza, and we have just a party afterwards. We're having fun. We're making money. Sales is the big thing at fun. We're mining the market. So we have found our market in startup or early struggle. We found who that is, and now we are mining it. So the number one thing we're doing is selling. The seller, the salespeople are what we call big dogs. They become the heroes of the business, and the whole business is organized around helping them sell. They are the heroes. They're there at that point, which comes back to bite you later. But at this point, it's great. It's great. And so they're building, selling, everybody's high-fiving. We're having a blast. We're buying new office furniture. We're buying a new van. We're doing great. Everybody's, in total harmony. And then what happens there, as you begin to mine the market, you start adding people, you start adding a few processes, but you don't add the right processes. And so typically what happens in the processes that most people organically go to, you have something over here and you have something over here, admin and sales, but in the middle, there's nothing there, and a lot of stuff starts falling through the cracks. And what happens is then the business starts to become more complex, and you start noticing complexity. And what happens there is finger pointing. Deadlines are starting to be missed. We promised the client we'd have this product to them or service to them in 4 weeks. It's now 7 weeks. And, it's their fault. It's Susie's fault. It's John's fault. We start finger pointing, and we start missing deliveries. We start, and this is the boiled frog thing, where the boiled frog, you put him in cold water, but as you turn the heat up, he will die, not realizing what's happening. Right. And so that's kind of what happens in the business. It's almost imperceptible. And we begin to say, well, the reason that delivery didn't happen was Sally. She handles that. She was off that day. So that's why that happens. But then what happens is you begin in this complexity, missing the deadlines. You get a lot of customer chargebacks. You get customers being upset that you've never had this before, right? This is all new. And so we're blaming people. And what the owner begins to do, the focus starts to get off the selling and starts putting out fires. So with your chargebacks and with cutting costs to, appease a customer, well, we'll only charge you 20, we'll take 20% off of that or whatever. And then not focusing on selling, the business starts becoming less profitable. And this is where the owner begins to think the business is going to shutter and maybe close. It's a horrible time during this time of the business. And we call that whitewater. So that's kind of the next natural procession. And it will happen in this business. They'll move from fun, and because of complexity, they'll move into a stage we call whitewater. And it's an awful time. So I hope that answered your question. That was long.
It does, and I've got 2 questions now. So as you're kind of making this transition, when do you want to start bringing in this operator and this processor? Because I think these problems are going to require these pieces. Can you get these folks in place to eliminate that, or is this,
You
a
can't,
little-
yeah,
a little
you
bit of
can.
natural piece?
Yeah, yeah. So the visionary and operator can be in the early struggle, and they can be through the fund stage. In fact, you probably aren't going to get through fund stage or into fund stage if you don't have both of those personalities.
Okay.
So as this complexity happens, the problem with it is, yes, you can get through it, right? But most owners don't know how to get through it. They've never been here before, right? They're just solo. You go back to sitting, 2 years ago, we're sitting at the kitchen table, figuring it out, like this idea, and we're putting all of our retirement into starting this thing. We've never done this before. And here we are now, we're in this problem. They don't know what they don't know, and they don't know what's happening. And the advantage that I have is I could look at it and tell you in 30 seconds what's happening, right? Or just talk to you on the phone and I'll know what's happening because I understand the process, but they don't. And that's the problem. And so there's a lot of education at that point. They just think, what happened to this happy family? We're all fighting with each other. It's miserable. And a lot of times it's the first time anybody ever quits you, right? And so they're like devastated. I lost John. What? He's been my best buddy. And how did this happen? And so there's a lot of that's going on. But the short answer, that's a long answer. But yes, you can get through it. But that's the trick right there, is to know what to do to get you out of that.
Right. So my other question, this is my original question. So talk a little bit more about this mining the market concept, because when you talked about it there, it's kind of like, I think you said you kind of moved past that pretty quick to the fun part, but the sales piece. But when we talked about it, it's a lot of trial and error. It's kind of back and forth. You're going to have some failures, you're going to have some wins and different things of that nature. So how do you do this? And, I know you talked about driving it a lot with sales. So it's almost like, I'm going to go out and try to make the sales. And if it works, great. If not, maybe I got to pivot or shift.
Yeah, so that typically happens in the early struggle where you're finding your market. Right. And that's the part where I think you're asking about, is how do you find that market? Would that be right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
how do you find the scalable market? Because like you said, I mean, you've got this early market, but how do you really mine the market to find this one that's going to allow you to take off?
Okay. So let's say, for instance, you're a lawn care company or whatever, and you've been cutting these residential homes, and all of a sudden you find this commercial property that allowed you to do their work, and you realize you could make a lot more money in that. Let's say you're in an area like in Dublin or whatever that has all of this growth going on, or up there in Delaware or whatever, where all this growth and stuff's happening and these corporate places are being built and all of that. You might find at that point, this is the market I think I can go after, right? You begin to niche down into that market, and then you begin to mine just that market. Right. But it takes a lot of doing residential stuff, or doing farm stuff, or doing, these little apartments or complexes or whatever. And you might find none of that really works for you, but you get this one job, and you go, this is where we're really good. Our sales team can talk to those folks. All of this stuff begins to happen there, and that's where you begin to mine that one market, and you begin to say, yeah, we can grow off of this market. I have a friend that has a coffee company, and he's been trying forever to find that market, right? Well, what happened was he got a order from the Columbus Zoo, And what he began to find then was that there's this coffee that is called bird-friendly coffee from the Smithsonian, right? You can get this label from the Smithsonian that says you sell bird-friendly coffee. Well, only that label and certification allows you to, in zoos all over the country or the wilds like is out there east of Columbus. Right. And so then he began to say, okay, that's who I'm going after. So those zoos and those aquariums, Newport Aquarium and all that, they became his customer, and he began to mine that thing. Half the time you fall into it, right? I mean, seriously, it's just luck, but it's trying, it's getting out there, it's getting a lot of no's. It's figuring out what your strengths are. Who can I talk to? Almost all of us have a person or a group of people that we're way more comfortable talking to, more natural, more gifted at. And you'll eventually just through trial and error figure it out. But there's a lot of, I mean, it's hard to do that.
Right. And use this term earlier. But when you're looking for the market, when you're kind of mining the market and you want to scale and you want to do these types of things, use the term profitable and sustainable market. So you may find a market that you like the work, and it may be profitable, but it's not sustainable.
Yeah.
And you're not going to scale very well if it's not sustainable. So you want to talk a little bit more about that terminology?
Yeah, it's scary. So when you're looking for profitability, you want something that's going to last. The market's going to last. How many companies do we know that have one client, right, and that client makes their whole salary? And if that client leaves, that business is done, right? So that's profitable, but it's not sustainable. And so what you need to have is a profitable where you can make some money. I know people that are selling products and they're losing money and they're making sales, but they're not making any money, or they're breaking even. Or I even know some digital marketing companies that will barter services, right? To whatever your product is, I'll barter my work for your work, right? Well, there's not profitability in that. And I mean, that's okay sometimes, but I mean, over. So you have to be profitable. It has to be something where you're making money. And then you have to be able to make money over and over and over and over again. And that's the markets you're looking for. And that could change based upon, if you do, we talk about SWOT analysis, these external forces. A competitor come in and change all that for you, or a government regulation could change that for you. So you're constantly being on the lookout for profitable and sustainable things that I can do over and over and over and over again with a lot of people or businesses.
And I would think that to be able to do this, to be able to understand whether you're profitable, you need to understand your numbers. And I think that sometimes that's where we run into people that don't really understand their numbers. And do you see that with this visionary founder, that they don't understand the numbers, they get more into the activity and the sales and the product and different things like that? Do you see that? And would you see the operator, or if you got to the processor, I mean, really being able to drive those numbers and understand that?
Yeah, the operator is the one that says, look, you got to quit spending this money. We don't have this money, right? You can't keep doing this. And they're the ones that they would be the QuickBooks. They would be the ones doing QuickBooks, or the ones implementing all of that. And the visionary, it's not that they don't understand it. They don't care. They just don't have and it's like I mentioned earlier in that meeting, you get into the details, they're gone. They've checked out, right? They don't care about any of that. And we all know people like that, right? The minute you get into the details, right, they're gone. And so, yeah, it's not that they don't really understand it. They just don't care. I got into a big argument one time with a client that probably the biggest argument I've ever had with a client was, it was a startup and they were doing a landscaping business, and they were kind of macho and kind of pushing me, you know, the whole time. And I let it go for quite a while. And we got to the finance part, and I said something about, I want you to know the finance. And he just stopped me and he goes, no. He goes, I'm not doing that. He goes, my wife will take care of that. And I said back to him, I said, if you want to work with me, then you're going to learn how to do it, because you may not do it long term, but you need to know as an owner how this works, right? And he settled down after that, and he did. And now they've gone on, but man, he was mad that I was going to push him to learn and go through it and learn QuickBooks and do all of that, because they just have no interest in it.
Right. So when we talk about mining the market research and different things like that, obviously there's kind of the two pieces of this. Number one, there's the demographic kind of research and databases and, all of that, and then really creating the persona. And then there's this psychographics of why they would do these types of things. But we're getting now to a point where we're starting to do that, where we've already got that stuff and we're going to start driving. And it appears to me that the mining the market and all of this is really, like I mentioned it earlier, driven by the sales process. You've got to get out. You've got to try to get people to buy. You've got to then venture outside of where your little niche is. Can we go here? Can we go here? And you let sales do that.
Yeah, in that fun stage, sales are number one. And that's what I mentioned. The whole organization at that point, the whole business is working to help the salespeople. That is all that they are doing. The salespeople, this is where the salespeople become very close to the owner. They become highly respected by the owner. They become the people. They're the most important people in the organization at that point, for sure. Right. And if you are doing anything other than helping them, that's not what you help us sell things. And then we'll all jump in and do what we need to do to deliver the product or service. But you're doing what you can do. Yeah, absolutely. We've understood the market. We've understood who our people are. We're getting better at talking to that market. Our brochures are coming online. Our verbiage is coming better. We're learning how to email and learning how to do all of these other things. And sales is number one for sure.
Absolutely. Okay. That's great. So one of the questions that I really want to make sure that we get to, so as you're an entrepreneur, so one of the things I always like with our SBDC, and I think a role of an SBDC and is to help these entrepreneurs or business owners or prospective business owners avoid some of the mistakes, but also understand what it is they need to do. And part of that, you can educate yourself. So what would you say some of the either sources of education or books that you like or things that you would recommend that these entrepreneurs, pick up, in the early stages to just kind of get a clue that we're moving forward?
Well, you mentioned the E-Myth by Michael Gerber. That's a good book. I found it difficult to read. I just, it wasn't one of my, it was just tough. The way he writes, I think, was just a little tough for me. I mean, I got the principles. It's not a hard book technically, but It's just the way he communicated. But there's a guy named Les McKeon. So it's LES and his last name is McKeown, Les McKeon. He came up with a thing called predictable success, which is kind of what we're talking about today. I would read that book, Predictable Success by Les McKeon. That's a stalwart book. I probably read that book 10 times a year. I'm constantly reading that. He also has another book called Do Lead. So do and then lead, and the same guy. And he goes into what we've talked about: visionary, operator, the processor, and then finally later down the road is the synergist, who ties this whole team together. I told you that, the visionary and operator and processor struggle sometimes, but the other one would be finally you put in somebody called a synergist, and they kind of help appease everybody, not in a bad way, but in a productive, helpful way. So that would be another book. And then he actually even wrote a book called The Synergist. And again, this is Les McKeon. I don't get anything from this. I think that he's a great guy. If you want to get a little more technical, there are some, and I'm trying to think of his name now. I've just blanked on his name. He's a Harvard professor, Michael, I forget his name now, but he's the one that came up basically with the 5 forces model, and he's a good guy. But like I said, I can't remember his last name, but sorry about that.
I don't know if Susie knows. I wish Chaz was here, Chaz Fertel, because Chaz leads a kind of startup program through the Noble Academy. But one of the books that he uses, and he has a whole session on this, is this Entrepreneurial Leap. And I can't remember the author's name.
Yeah, I know that book.
It's by the gentleman that wrote Traction, which is like one of the key business books in terms of creating these systems, I think, really. But that Entrepreneurial Leap is good because I think it gives you a sense of, what are you about? I mean, this business owner, passion, things like that, or are you, hey, I'm going to scale and I'm going to jump to the next one and I'm going to jump to the next one. So I think that's a good book too. And it's called Entrepreneurial Loop. I just can't remember who the author is. So
10 years ago, we would have remembered their names.
Yeah. If I was sitting in my office, I could just go grab.
Yeah, for sure.
So I don't have that. This has been great. I really appreciate it. What's a recommendation? What's one thing that you would tell somebody to say they're in business, they're kind of slogging through, they're kind of at those early stages? What's something you would tell them that they should do, like between now and the end of the day tomorrow, just to kind of jumpstart a little bit of action on their part?
I would say, look at my market and see if I really understand who that is. See if I really understand who I'm reaching. And if the answer is everyone, you need to figure that out, because that's not it. But I would say really take a look at my target, because I think that's really the first place. Who am I talking to? Who can I best talk to? And what am I offering to them that they need? Am I offering things they don't need or want, right? I'd really go back and look at that and just make sure that I'm talking to the right people and that my service offerings align with what they need. And I think that would be those two things. See if I'm matching that. And the third thing I would add to that is, am I communicating clearly to them in the place that they consume information and in the way that they consume information? Am I talking their language or am I talking my language? So those three things. So am I really understanding who my customer is? What is the service offering that I'm providing? Is it really meeting what they need? Do I need to define that or refine it in some way? And then am I communicating my competitive advantage? to them in a way, in a place that they are there, number one, and that they understand.
No, that's great advice. That's great advice. So again, Rick, I appreciate you coming on here.
Yeah, it's fun.
I think you do amazing stuff. I love working with you. Hopefully we'll be able to pull some stuff together and get you back here in Central Ohio, working with some folks on behalf of the SBDC. But I know you're working with other SBDCs as well as, you know, your individual client flow. So again, thank you for everything you're doing.
Oh, no, it was fun. It's great to see you.
Yeah, absolutely. So for everybody else, I want to thank you for joining us today or watching this on YouTube. If you are watching it on YouTube, be sure you subscribe to our SBDC YouTube channel, which is Ohio SBDC, or and like the session, because this definitely helps us get the word out and get this great information from all of these folks that we deal with in Small Business Breakthroughs out. Also want to thank Susie and Chaz for their support. The Dublin Entrepreneurial Center has been a great supporter of the SBDC, but also the entrepreneurial ecosystem here in Central Ohio. So again, thank you guys for your participation, and look forward to seeing everybody next month. We're going to have some really exciting stuff. I'm looking forward to it, and be sure you go check out Rick's website. What's the website, Rick?
Just SlarkConsultingGroup.com.
Yeah, Lark or
Slark, yeah.
SlarkConsultingGroup.com.
Yep.
And you know, good stuff there. So
Thanks.
everybody, you guys have a great rest of your day, and wishing you entrepreneurial success going forward. Thanks a lot.
For sure.